Okay, good afternoon, members. My name is James Swan. As Vice President of the Public Service, I would like to welcome you all to the briefing today. Thank you for joining in. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners in the lands in which we meet. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I will now hand over to our Union State Secretary, Alex Scott, to continue the briefing.
Thanks, James, and thanks everybody for participating today. As part of this process, we did ask members if they have any questions, and we'll try and cover the majority of questions that you put in during the session. As with these sessions, we will be trying to keep them to around half an hour. I know people are reasonably short on time, so we're focusing most of our time talking about the issues that were prioritised in terms of the broad set of questions, and we'll start the presentation in just a second. We've still got a few more people clicking through. I think we'll go up to, so once that number starts to stabilise, we will formalise the start of the meeting to make sure everybody gets full information about what's being discussed today. So I think we've stabled around the 250s, which is what we're probably expecting for today. So I might now kick off. After James's introduction, I think in terms of this process, we will be trying to cover the major issues that were raised by people in the request for in terms of the list of questions. So hopefully now you should have your my presentation on the screen. If people aren't able to see the PowerPoint, if you can flag that to me before we kick off. No, it looks like it's working. So in terms of today's briefing, it is designed as the regular monthly briefing for Together members who are employed within the Queensland Public Service. In terms of this, we do try and have them the last week of the month, but given Labor Day, we moved last week's meeting to today. In terms of the agenda that we're trying to cover off today, as I said, we'll be trying to keep it to around half an hour. But today's agenda, the main topics that have been primarily raised with both in terms of our industrial assessment about where things are at, but also what members have asked us in questions prior to today was in relation particularly to the return to office and some of the announcements the government's made there, talking about workloads and the staffing cap, but then talking about issues in relation to sexual harassment and sexual assault, workplace bullying and COVID-19 vaccinations. There were a number of questions also specifically around some of the changes that are occurring within the Queensland Police Service, and we'll be doing a separate email to members in relation to the Stage 3 and Stage 4 processes within Queensland Police, separately from today's meeting, because that'll take a while to go through in terms of that process. And therefore able to work that through. There will be a presentation. This presentation is being recorded, and we will try and make that available to people afterwards who can't make today's meeting. So if I can get the process to work. In terms of the major issue we wanted to spend more time on today was in relation to the return to work announcements that have been made by the Queensland government. So during COVID, we had a lockdown where a number of people were required to work from home. And then the majority of public sector workers continue to deliver services in our hospitals and schools, etc. But we've had a period where we've had a significant number of our members who've been working from home. Then late last year, we then started to move to a graduated, or middle of last year, we started to have some return to office. And then we've had some discussions and some announcements made by the government in relation to a return of 25% and then discussions around a return to 50% and what that looked like. And so we've seen gradually more and more public servants returning to an office environment and less people spending less of their week working from home. We went a couple of weeks ago, about a month or so ago now, the Public Service Commission engaged with the union for a discussion around whether or not the 50% mark in terms of a target return to work should be increased to 80%. Those discussions were scheduled the day of that got held off because the day they were scheduled to occur was the day of the lockdown in Brisbane. And so clearly the government recognised that given the 3-day lockdown in the broader southeast Queensland wasn't the time to be talking about a return to work. What we've seen since then was further discussions with government and with the Public Service Commission in relation to whether or not an 80% target should or shouldn't be adopted. And then last week we saw an announcement by the Public Service Commission and the Public Service Board in relation to a return to office strategy that didn't include the 80% target. And that has caused a significant amount of confusion within the sector as to exactly what the announcement does or doesn't mean in relation to where public servants are at and what the rules now applying to government departments and to individual public servants and union members about what is the requirements in relation to return to work and what is the practical applications in relation to return to office for our members. In our verbal conversations with senior government within the Public Service Commission, our understanding is that the government chose not to adopt the 80% target, so was looking at a more flexible target in terms of discussions with the workforce in relation to return to office. Unfortunately, the way that the communication has been provided out in terms of the Cabinet decision and then the Public Service Board decision in relation to the implementation of the Cabinet decision is phrased around that the status quo is now return to office unless you have an individual flexibility agreement in place. What that's being interpreted by is in a lot of government departments, but not all, is that everybody must return to work immediately, and that some people with existing flexible arrangements will be allowed to keep them, but they will be reviewing them with the option of trying to have everybody in the office rather than a flexible workplace arrangement. But also what we understand from the government's the decision from the Public Service Commission and the Public Service Board was that there would be a return to work within the framework of the broader election commitments that were given by the ALP in the lead up to last year's state election in relation to what that process looked like. And what we were able to achieve in terms of Together's engagement with the ALP in the lead up to the state election was to seek a guarantee that there would be a move away from a target of return to office, but actually move towards a target of people working from home. What we were seeking to do in the lead up to the state election was to get the government to recognise that there was real value, not only for workers, but also for service delivery, about not losing the benefits we had that we learned during COVID, and the significant obstacles that existed 2 years ago in relation to working from home were smashed through because of the crisis in terms of the lockdown in relation to the pandemic. What we wanted to seek to do was make sure that the ability for workers to continue working from home, not necessarily on a full-time capacity, but in a hybrid model of some office work and some work from home, was a substantial improvement in terms of reduction of absenteeism, improvement in services, but also from our members' point of view, what we were seeing is the lived experience for lots of workers was that their work-life balance was significantly improved as a result of not having to spend an hour or two on the train or on the bus or stuck in traffic, particularly in the Brisbane southeast corner area, to do that process. So we were able to get that commitment from the ALP in the lead up to the last state election. We got that in writing around a structured process of targeting, making sure that there was maximisation of working from home and making sure that there was that each agency would have a target of trying to ensure that there was enough working from home arrangements in place. That was also important because we knew that some of the largest obstacles in relation to the working from home environment was middle to senior managers who didn't trust their staff to be able to be productive, and they found it easier to manage staff if they could physically see them and were concerned in relation to that. And that's really the kickback we've seen over the last week has been middle to senior managers saying, we have now got the right and the ability to direct everybody to come to work, and my job as a manager is to drive people to come to work, and I want them to do that. That is not what we were seeking to do. What we were seeking to do was change the balance in terms of the workplace flexibility arrangements to make sure that the default wasn't you will come to work unless you can prove otherwise. We have proven for a large segment of the public service working from home is possible. Working from home improves productivity, and working from home improves the work-life balance for large numbers of our members. And what we'll be seeking to do is part of this process is to get a move that the government recognises their election commitments around the target for working from home rather than a target from return to office. So, but then also to have a graduated process of engagement in relation to at an agency level, and then also through a central consultative forum, which we've got a commitment to create, but has yet to meet in relation to what the working from home policies look like. What we expect to be happening over the short term, particularly amongst bad employers, will be that they will be seeking to rip up the flexible arrangements, and they'll be trying to put as much pressure on employees to say, you are coming to work, everybody from next Tuesday, next Thursday, whatever, and unless you have a workplace flexibility arrangement in place. What they should be doing is saying, okay, we are going to have a movement in terms of return to office. Who are the people who want to have flexibility work arrangements and continue to working from home in terms of some sort of mix, either for high-risk people who've got underlying health risks at risk still because of the pandemic, but also those people who want to have a work-life balance which is improved by having 1, 2, 3 days of working from home rather than working from the office. This is going to be, over the next couple of weeks, a bit of a challenge in terms of making agencies who are bad employers understand their responsibilities, but also making sure that there is the ability to have a conversation at the local level where the norm is that you will be able to work from home for a couple of days a week or 1 day a week. Isn't the extraordinary, unusual circumstance, but that is something that the employer should be encouraging to ensure that process, rather than workers having to jump through significant hoops and being in a much more challenging environment about having to prove why they should be able to access a workplace arrangement, flexibility arrangement, rather than that process. So in terms of that, we've contacted the agencies today to seek those agency level consultations. Some agencies are going to go really well with that. They've got good employers. They just need clarification around this, and we will seek that they then go out engaging with the workforce around workplace flexibility arrangements, but also seek that they engage with the union about how they approve or don't approve those, because we want to shift the balance of probabilities in terms of decision making from an individual to a collective, but also to make sure that middle management are in a situation where they can unduly withhold the approval for people who are 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, having 1 or 2 days a week from home. They should still be able to put that in place and make sure that they do the paperwork around flexibility arrangements as quickly as possible in light of the new arrangements announced by government. But then also where there is significant push by employers to say that they're using the umbrella of the current government decision as a way of saying they want everybody back in the workplace 9 to 5, doing that on a collective basis rather than an individual basis. So workers are able to engage to make sure that their voice is heard and that there isn't unreasonably withheld applications in relation to flexible workplace arrangements. What that will look like agency by agency will be partially determined by how bad the employers are, and potentially within agencies how aggressive middle management is to try and abuse the current announcement into a way that would force challenges with workers feeling they're being compelled to return to office, rather than being in a situation of a more sensible and rational conversation with workers saying, we want to return to office, which of you want to formalise the working from home arrangements, and how much of a return to working from home arrangements do you want to have on a work unit basis or a departmental basis. And so we'll be seeking that engagement for the bad employers to make sure that we can drive a collective decision around the fact that that there should be we should be locking in the success of working from home in post-COVID to mean that the balance going forward is that we would expect a significant percentage of the people who were working from home a month ago to still be able to do that. So in terms of that, that will look at what that looks like. I think that conversation will also get overlapped in terms of the election commitments about the establishment of the suburban hubs, particularly in Brisbane, to allow for alternatives working from office arrangements. The advantage of that for the government is that a mixture of working from home and working from office in a suburban hub will drive the ability to reduce the rental footprint. So the savings and debt plan that the government announced last year included a ability to reduce the footprint, which would then mean spending less money on rental properties in the CBD. But in terms of the election commitments we got out of the government was that would be targeted for reduction by increased working from home and increased suburban hub arrangements. That is still a way off in some places in terms of building that up. But what we would hope is that we can get a meaningful conversation at a sector-wide level about how those savings can be driven back into the agency budgets to achieve the $3 billion savings in terms of the savings and debt, which was the kind of initial cut that was announced last year, as much as possible having the suburban hub reduction in footprint drive the rental costs down, but also meaning for our members who are interested in it, they'll have the combination of working from home for a period during the week, which means substantial benefits in terms of work-life balance, but also potentially, particularly in the outer suburbs and on the coast, being able to have that option of a working from office, but that office not being in the Brisbane CBD, and so therefore cutting the travel time down. That does require some cultural changes, but the cultural changes for the hubs is far less than the cultural changes we achieved last year because of the enforced lockdown. So what that looks like is probably going to be a period of confusion within the sector as the kind of the individual agreements will be the starting point, but we will be putting out some material after today's Zoom in relation to registering around that to make sure that we can get a picture where in the best case situation, good employers say, okay, we're wanting to return to office, so therefore we need to formalise the workplace working from home arrangements on the individual capacity rather, and the next few weeks should be about formalisation of those individual workplace arrangements. That's going to be for the good employers who understand what their current announcement is, as opposed to what it says in writing, and that we should then say a reasonably smooth process where the employer is recognising the benefits and giving some certainty, but probably some formalisation of the arrangements that have existed over the last couple of weeks. That's kind of one end of the spectrum. Through that spectrum, we'll then apply different arrangements depending on how good or bad the employer is, or how good or bad local management is interpreting the work from home arrangements and the current decision from government in terms of and the implementation of that by the Public Service Board and the Public Service Commission in relation to a return to office arrangement. So what that will look like in each agency and in your work unit, we're already looking at the formalisation process, but to what extent we end up in disputation around that will be to what extent managers are, or local management or senior management is unreasonably withholding approval of the flexible work arrangements to formalise working from home and getting that work-life balance. What we'll be seeking to do as a union as part of that will be to collectivise the response to that. So rather than individuals having to do that process and being in dispute with the employer, we will seek to measure what's happening, see where they're being approved, see where they're being knocked back, and then engaging to try and show where there's been the significant abuse is occurring, seeking to engage at the agency level to try and force them to accept a higher percentage of work from home that better reflects the work-life balance where people are at. And then secondly, where that might then have to get articulated either through the Industrial Relations Commission in the process, but also in terms of them being able to be in place for a sector-wide conversation. So in terms of that process, that's what we'll see over the next, some information from the union office. Hopefully, if you're in a good employer, some capacity to formalise the individual arrangements, but then monitoring over the next couple of days. We've already seen some bad employers in this space, but how broad the problem is, and then escalating that through agency consultation for collective conversations around return to office policies, and then potentially having to move that to the sector-wide. I'm confident we should be able to fix that, but there is also the potential that we might use some industrial disputation through the Industrial Relations Commission to assist in that if we aren't able to get as much in terms of that process. And I think also overlapping that will also be our conversation around the workplace health and safety components of this. So while we have some government policy around this, there will be certainly some conversation around what the workplace health and safety component looks like. That will be part of our conversation at the moment, but not necessarily the substance of our conversation, because we also want to make sure that the working from home arrangements are concrete into the future. And so while there is a COVID risk at the moment, I think the challenge will be that once vaccinations come in at the end of this year, early next year, our workplace health and safety argument about working from home will be reduced. And the practical reality of what we're seeking to do is give workers more capacity to have work from home arrangements. So it's about a safe workplace, but it's also about work-life balance. And the locking in of work-life balance can't be underpinned purely by the workplace health and safety issues, because once the vaccination rollout has occurred, it's likely that our ability to argue workplace health and safety will be reduced later this year, early next year, even though it's reasonably strong at the moment. So the key outcome for that is what we're really looking at then is wanting to make sure that that you are able to do the individual flexibility arrangements. You should be formalising those where you have good employers. Where we are having problems, either being told by local management you can't do it, or they trying to force an unrealistic and inappropriate percentage, either everybody back at the office 100%, or if you feel that the middle or senior management in your agency is not providing the percentage of work from home that you think is appropriate, we'll need to be dealing with that collectively, so it's not just individual workers having to go one out, and that will then be escalated through a series of processes. So that's not a clear answer for everybody, but please stay engaged. There will be more material coming out from the union office over the next couple of days, but really don't believe everything you're told by middle management. There isn't a requirement that everybody return to office as a result of the government decision. There is a requirement that where people are working from home, we move to a formalised flexibility arrangements and having those documented, and those should be documenting an appropriate mix, not a complete mix. So in terms of that, in terms of what is a success, in terms of that, the level of success is really going to be determined by what you as groups of workers individually see as appropriate. People aren't going to be able to work 100% from home forever and a day, but what is the appropriate mix between work from the office in the CBD or other locations, work from the office from suburban location and hubs, and working from home. But we want to make sure that this outcome makes the public service look very different to what it looked like in 2019, and a much higher level of acceptance and adoption of work from home arrangements to drive a much greater flexibility arrangements and a much better balance of working from home. So you're delivering best quality services, but spending as little time as required stuck on trains and cars and in public transport. So that's where we're going with working from home, and that's, I know that's been probably the majority of today's meeting was going to be taken up by that, but it is a complicated issue, but is one that that we need you to make sure that you get involved, stay involved, tell us what's going on in your workplace. Don't assume everybody else in your workplace has told the union office what's going on, and then we're able to escalate those issues agency by agency. But please talk to your colleagues and make sure that that feedback is being provided with us, and so we can collectively take that response up where agencies aren't doing the right thing. But also, if your agency is doing the right thing as well, please tell the union office, because that also helps us map out what is standard practice across the sector. The secondary issue that's come up most in terms of questions is really in relation to the staffing cap and the workloads issue. Clearly, we are still seeing, as a result of the savings and debt issue, a real problem in relation to recruitment selection, particularly in those areas which are deemed not to be frontline services. and so therefore having to jump through enormous hoops. So even when positions are being filled, eventually through external recruitment, the delays that are occurring are significant, and the practical impact of that in terms of workloads for the rest of the workforce is significant. So we've met with most directors general over the last last 6 to 8 weeks around a range of issues, and certainly both we've raised this already with the directors general about the fact that we need to go back and pull the band-aid off, call out for what it is in terms of the hoops that are having to be jumped through in relation to non-filling of positions, go back and then force in the lead up to the budget an acceptance that if there's going to be establishment control, it needs to be clear cut. Then that process needs to be clear and transparent. They need to be committed in terms of maintaining staffing levels, and we have some commitments around that we need to enforce. But also that we need to drive home in the state budget this year a fundamental challenge to Budget Principle 6 in terms of the process that the ability of the artificial cap in relation to public service numbers, particularly outside of schools and health, is meaning we're actually seeing a contraction of the public service rather than a maintenance of those numbers. So Budget Principle 6 has been partially suspended in the budget in December, but we need to have that conversation, which links up to the contractor consultant conversation as part of the savings and debt, to say that there will be realistic staffing levels within the public service. There won't be an artificial cap, and the artificial distinction between frontline and non-frontline in terms of recruitment methods needs to be lifted, because particularly for the smaller agencies and the CBD-based work is being more aggressively impacted in terms of the loss of positions through the staffing cap and through the delayed recruitment and selection processes is having a greater proportional impact on the smaller the agency or the smaller the work unit, the greater the impact is going to be. So we are doing a political engagement around that. We have got some work that's being done. We'll be asking you to be involved in that campaign in the lead up to the June budget. Part of it is about trying to address the underlying second year cuts in relation to savings and debt, because they are going to be significant. We know that there was a $750 million cut to agencies as year one of savings and debt. Year two of savings and debt is going to have a more dramatic impact in our view, in that the ability to continue to put blood out of the stone in relation to second year cuts was always going to be harder to achieve than first year cuts. They can be achieved if they do it through the likes of contractors and consultants and the savings in relation to the CDD footprint, but that is not a short-term project. It's a longer-term project. But the other thing that we'll be seeking your support for is to try and put enough political pressure on the government to understand the practical impact of the variety of decisions that were taken during 2020 in terms of the savings and debt plan, and then what that meant for in frontline, non-frontline, and then in terms of them moving to recruitment and selection, and then also underpinning that the Budget Principle number 6. So that is the key driver, has been is driving the workloads going up. There are areas where there is significant need for additional staff because of kind of hundreds of new schools being built, etc. But in terms of the biggest driver in terms of workloads at the moment has been the failure to fill jobs as they become vacant, which is a combination of savings and debt plus the original Budget Principle 6. And the campaign around that really will be escalating into the early week of June. We'll be doing some stuff through the ALP as well as through the industrial circles and looking at how we deal with that. But our success in that space will also be primarily driven by how much workers and members are involved in terms of driving that conversation. So working from home, we think we'll be able to work with you on, but in terms of the ability to win on workloads, we need more people involved in the lead up to the state budget, the ALP state conference, and a broader structural engagement to deal with what that looks like. The other two things we were hoping to cover off today, but we'll cover off in more detail because they're not as urgent, is we have seen some significant announcements made by the government in the last 24 hours to 48 hours around legislative reform. There will be a 5-year review of the Industrial Relations Act this year being conducted, but also that will also pick up issues in relation to sexual harassment and sexual assault at work, which is particularly gratifying given the work that Together members put in terms of getting a great turnout to Labor Day. That message clearly has been resonating with politicians, and we are now starting to see movement at the state level around that. That will be included in the review of the Industrial Relations Act, and hopefully we'll also be able to get it included in the Public Service Act as well, because certainly from my perspective, having it a higher level of responsibility in the Public Service Act, I think goes further than the minimums that might be included in the Industrial Relations Act. But also that 5-year review of the Industrial Relations Act will allow us to really address one of the failures of the current Act, which is in relation to the failure of the current Act to deal with workplace bullying. That Act was introduced some changes, but the practical impact of those changes has been negligible, and bullying remains a significant challenge and a significant problem in a number of government departments. So the legislation isn't the only solution, and it isn't the complete solution, but we do need to engage with both the IR Act review, Industrial Relations Act review, and the Public Service Act review to really get engaged to come up with concrete protections for workers around workplace bullying, rather than the binary kind of one-size-fits-all approach under the current Act, which has completely failed to provide the protections that workers need in relation to that bullying space. So you'll see some information from the union in relation to that, and we would certainly seek members' involvement and ideas around that, but that will be a longer term project. The Industrial Relations Act review will be probably kind of taking kind of 3 months or so. The Public Service Act review is something that is an ongoing one that's been going for a while, but we'll be seeking to escalate the sexual harassment and sexual assault stuff into the Public Service Act stuff, given the success of the great turnout we had at Labor Day in Brisbane primarily, and the fact that we're able to use being at the front of the march to send a clear message to the politicians and to the broader community that this is an issue that workers take very seriously, and we want action on it now. So for those who turned up to Labor Day, thanks. I think your efforts made a great difference in terms of resonating with government, and I think, but we need to keep that pressure on them to make those changes, and then particularly in terms of the Public Service Act dealing with the bullying issue and being involved in what looks like practical solutions underpinned by legislative reform to give more protections for workers across the board. And then the other pieces that we probably won't have great deal capacity to talk about today, because I spent more time talking about the return to office than I would have hoped. But I think in terms of covering the questions, I think that's really where the majority of members' focus has been over the last couple of days. We will be talking about the right to disconnect. It does interplay with the working from home issue. And that's really about making sure that the extension of technology and rolling out of smartphones and better technologies doesn't mean that the work continues to impinge more and more into our non-working lives, particularly for people working from home. That is a challenge, that if you have technology available for you to be available during office hours to do work, that doesn't mean you should be working 24/7. And we, particularly in relation to mental health, we think there is a significant challenge around this space, and we are going to be working also at a national level, but also at a state level, to try and drive conversations around improvements around understanding that work is changing, that we are wanting to have better work-life balance, which is about our location of work. But just because we're working from home for 7.25 hours a day doesn't mean we're working from home 24 hours a day. And finding structures and practices and culture that allow us to work hard, deliver great outcomes for the community and for our agencies, but not have a situation where work can become all-consuming. And I certainly think there was a percentage of the membership who are working from home who found that particularly challenging, and we need to make some fundamental changes to the nature of industrial law to better reflect an appropriate work-life balance as technology expands and as pressure comes on for more 24/7 operations of government agencies. In terms of the COVID-19 vaccinations, we have had some specifics on that, but we'll get out a particular communication about that. Particularly, we won't go through the detail of that in today's meeting, given the fact we have already run over time. but we will try and get out some information around what that looks like. Certainly in terms of the union policy, we'll send out the link that talks about the fact that the vaccinations shouldn't be compulsory, where we're seeing that is where that is being raised by employers. We'll make sure that that if there are departmental, and we've got a couple of them came in over the last couple of days, concerns about what that looks like, we'll raise that. But as with the working from home stuff, if you have concerns about that, please contact the union office. Don't assume what your employer is telling you is the truth. Don't assume that they have misunderstood what government policy is in this space or what the law is in this space. And there isn't, and in terms of that process, there will be a push to try and get the employers to tell people that they want maximum vaccinations. Vaccinations are good. Vaccinations are important in terms of a long-term community response to the pandemic, but certain individuals are going to be, for underlying health reasons, not appropriate. For that, we need to protect the individuals in that space, but certainly from a union perspective, we would be encouraging, based on the science and based on best health advice, that we do need to have a long-term solution to pandemic. But the vaccination area will be one that will become challenging, particularly in some employers, if we have inappropriate behaviour by employers in terms of that space. So I'm sorry that we didn't kind of spend as much time on the last couple of items in the agenda today, but certainly in terms of the working from home appears to be a significant challenge in terms of misinterpretation from the membership. We will get something out in the next 24 hours in writing about our advice about this. But in terms of that process, we will be wanting to make sure that then we engage on an agency level. And the only way we'll be able to successfully do this is if people get involved, tell us what's going on. Don't assume that because your employer's knocked you back, they're doing the right thing or they're doing the legal thing. This is an area where we need to change the power balance within workplaces. The situation 2 and 3 years ago was it was very difficult to get returned to work, to be able to work from home. The number of hoops you had to jump through were significant. That all changed in 2020 when we were all forced to work from home because of the lockdown. What we want to achieve over the next couple of months and the next couple of weeks is to shift the balance of power within the workplace to give you more rights in terms of this process, and to make sure that the practical application of the flexible work arrangements deliver more to workers, and that the balance of power and the balance of probabilities being used by middle management and senior management about whether you should work from home or whether you should work from the office there is a shift in that balance, a shift towards workers, a shift towards having the ability to work from home, and a shift towards an appropriate work-life balance. That's not straightforward. It is grey, but working together, we can achieve that. We have got outcomes last year in terms of commitments from the state government in terms of what this policy looks like, but only if we are vigilant and push this process will we make sure that you are able to do that. So that's about talking to the union office about what's happening in your workplace, but also talking to other workers where you feel that you're not getting a fair opportunity to make sure that we change this from an individual to a collective. The outcome will be individual flexible arrangements, but we want them negotiated on a collective basis to make sure that we can then use the power of the union to deliver the best possible outcome. That power of the union comes from you being involved, comes from you being part of that process, and we will work closely as a union office to make sure we do that. But please stay involved, make sure you contact us, and make sure that we don't allow the way the announcement was framed to have people being forced to 100% return to office without actually talking about what is best for workers, not what is in the interests of middle management, because they want to see you eyeball you on a day-to-day basis because they don't know how to manage staff properly. So thank you very much in terms of that process. If you've got more detailed questions, please, we'll get that email out in the next 24 hours to talk through what the strategy looks like. But you would have got the email about today's meeting, and we'll send out an email to everybody who attended today's Zoom asking for further details, but we'll do an all-member email to the broader public service in the next 24 hours to make sure we can fully coordinate that process. So thanks for everybody involved. We'll try and do another one of these in about 3 to 4 weeks and give you a bit more notice rather than just the couple of days we had here. But also, these are an attempt to provide you with the best possible information, give us feedback so we can hopefully make these union meetings as relevant to you in the workplace as possible, and as relevant in a stepping stone towards building a stronger union that can change your lives in terms of your workplace by being better engaged. So thank you very much for your time, and please come to the next meeting when it's involved, and please make sure you stay involved.